Shweta? Shweta? We're good to go. Right, if I could just request everyone to be seated. The prolonged nature of the COVID-19 pandemic has devastated local economies worldwide, forcing millions of small businesses to permanently shut down, increasing poverty, disrupting supply chains, and also fueling uncertainty throughout all industries. With small and medium-sized enterprises actually making up 90% of all businesses and accounting for 7 out of 10 jobs created, how can governments and businesses come together to rebuild this very, very important section of the society? Hello and a very warm welcome to everyone for this very special session, Building Future-Ready Local Economies. My name is Shweta Rajpal Kohli, and I'm the Chief Public Policy Officer for Sequoia Capital India. And it's indeed my privilege and honor to have this very diversified and relevant panel for this discussion today. Let me introduce the panelists. Gustavo Montezano, Chief Executive Officer of the Brazilian Development Bank. Ria Mazumdar-Singhal, CEO of India's EcoWare Solutions. Ibrahim Al-Mojel, Chief Executive Officer of Saudi Industrial Development Fund, and Cherry Nursalim, Vice Chairman of Indonesia's Giti Group. And thank you all for joining us today for this session. Let me just kick it off by first getting a sense from our panelists on the relevance of the SME space within your respective countries and economies and regions. How important do you think the SME sector is, and how badly has it been hit? And if you could, substantiate that with either anecdotes or data in terms of what the pandemic has really meant for the SME sector. Why don't we start with you, Montezano?
Sure. Good afternoon. Just before I start speaking about SME, just 1 minute about BNDES. We're the Brazilian National Development Bank. We are a wholesale bank. We don't have retail. However, we are fully present on the SME market in 2 ways. First, to own lending, so we lend to local institutions that lend to the SME business. And secondly, managing federal funds that guarantees credit. As of today, you have roughly $170 billion in Brazil for SME credit, according to our central bank, from which roughly 20% passes through BNDES hands. So we have quite a broad view on the systems without being present at the last mile. And I can tell you that the pandemic was a challenging time, of course, but it was a big learning for we in Brazil on how to treat and how to deal with SME. Just a high-level figure, if you compare Feb 2020 to Feb 2022, the total credit for SME in Brazil grew 50%. Basically because the government responded to the urgency, put in place a guarantee fund, something that is common elsewhere, in Brazil not so much, and the results were impressive. So during the pandemic, we grew 50% in 2 years of credit to SME. And when we speak about SME, I like to split in both groups, the formal SME and the informal SME, which in Brazil accounts to roughly 30% of our workforce, the informal ones. So I'll stop here so we can...
So the informal, you're saying, is 30% of
30% of the workforce, yeah.
Ria, you represent and work with a large section of the SME within India. Share with us what you think the pandemic has meant for this space.
So Shweta, I mean, it goes without saying that the SMEs are the backbone of the Indian economy, right? From the perspective of job creation, social development, I mean, there's a great impact that SMEs have. And we are an SME. I think, at EcoWare, fortunately for us, we're in the sustainable packaging space. And what the pandemic did was make disposable equate to hygiene, right? So everyone wanted something that was single use. And EcoWare became even more pertinent. Products like EcoWare became even more pertinent. But what we did see was, I think, a lot of women-led enterprises that did suffer because of the lack of access to capital, funding. And I think that is something that was unfortunate. And I think that, we could do more for, basically, from an SME perspective, for sure.
Great. Ibrahim, your thoughts overall on the SME space and how it's been impacted by the pandemic?
So I think it's been a tough time for SMEs over the last 2 years, whether it's the pandemic or the recent change in the economic landscape. So there are three challenges they're facing. First, the increased complexity, which we noticed in the pandemic. So a challenge that will happen in China impacts the supply chain in Brazil.
Right.
And that complexity, SMEs are not ready to deal with it. Second is finance. Over the last 3 or 4 decades, we didn't go through a prolonged period of high inflation and liquidity leaving the market. So even with the pandemic, there was more injection of liquidity. Now, with all what we are hearing, if this high inflation, high interest rate is going to continue, we don't have the expertise or talent, especially within SMEs, to deal with liquidity being left out. Third, which I think is the toughest, is access to talent.
Right.
With the increased competitiveness and increased access that was brought in by digital workplace, it's wonderful, but also means the large companies can compete with SMEs wherever they are in accessing talent. So the requirement to upskill talent and upskill the firms themselves has been a challenge. And technology is the way to address that.
Right, I'll come to the role that technology is going to play, but first to Cherry, your thoughts again on the overall impact that the SME sector has seen during the pandemic.
Thank you. I think, I come from a private sector, a GT group, and I think working with SMEs has been in our DNA, and I think we have started collaborations because we believe that they are the co-creation of the market. They co-create the market with us. And example is we are in the business of manufacturing, for example, tire business. We're also in the real estate as well as in retail. And in each of this area, our model is working with SMEs. So we have exported together with them, supporting how they can outreach the export market, as well as supporting them in capacity building. For example, in the COVID times, there's a lot of unemployed, and we actually, whether it is young people, whether it is retirees, we actually create like auto shops, repair shops, and we do training. And then we actually finance those shops, and it's movable. So they can actually become their own SMEs and become their own. And we have developed applications. I think you wanted to talk on the technology later, but we do have developed a system where we actually will grow with our SMEs and having also winning awards on big data as well as digital working together. Also, we are now looking at apart from capacity building, finance, also on the climate front,
right,
how we can work with SMEs to support that. I think I was the vice chairman of ICC, and we have developed a digital blockchain platform on traceability and others. So we are working, the holistic way.
Right, and I think every crisis presents with it an opportunity, and I think that's something we would love to focus on, that, while everyone's been hit very badly during the pandemic, is there an opportunity here? Are we already seeing solutions, like some of you are mentioning, come to the table that are actually going to help move to what quote unquote we're saying a future-ready economy, or a future-proof economy? But before we talk about what that future-ready and future-proof should be, I think one thing that everyone seems to have touched upon, gently at least, is technology and the power of technology, and how technology is going to play that key role. So let's jump straight into that. And Ibrahim, you talked about it, and try and understand why you believe that in a post-pandemic world, technology will be that key tool for SMEs to help ride through this crisis. So
let's begin by acknowledging that SMEs are challenged to access technology. There is a real challenge they're facing in accessing technology, and there need to be a collective effort to help them access it. A recent report by WEF, December 2021, said that only 27% of SMEs that were surveyed improved during the pandemic.
Right.
Where we all, even households, improved, SMEs, only a quarter did. Technology is important for them in 3 ways. It increases competitiveness by increasing data, transparency, reduces costs, but it also gives them access to a market where they can be competitive in a niche product, but now that niche can be global, so it can increase that market, despite it being a niche product. Second, access to finance. The development of fintech, blockchain, despite the challenges, promises to reduce the cost of transaction, access to finance from retail and other sources of financing that they didn't have access to before, would reduce the cost of financing for them. And third is to attract talent. So they can, if we can help SMEs leverage the online tools to access talent, but also for themselves to be ready. The new workforce is not comfortable being digitally native, used to a supercomputer in their hand, and going to work to just input data or move paper. So for SMEs to be able to attract and retain talent, they need to adopt technology themselves to help the new workforce feel at home at the workforce.
Right, Sherry, you mentioned technology as well, and you talked about your digital blockchain as an example. Would you like to elaborate further and talk about the role and the importance of technology in today's times, especially digitizing SMEs?
Yes, thank you. So I think in terms of the business side, I think that platform enabled our partners. Some of them are already third generation with our business, you know, from the grandfather and then now so in some of them in very remote areas, like we were in Bhutan, and then they were just in the mountains, and then they were saying how they were able to access market because of our system. And I think we believe that there is we can collaborate and actually market other products also with this digital platform, which give more opportunities for the SMEs, and we can also sort of be able to allocate the customers to come to them, so they are able to direct them because of the system. And I think we also believe in a larger scale. How do we support the whole ecosystem? So we have a foundation called United in Diversity Foundation, and we have been working with leading universities like MIT, Tsinghua University, University of Indonesia, and we have started developing technology programs. One is called Happy Digital X, Cities, Systems, Products, and Services. And so this is something that we believe, I think what Ibrahim said, the capacity building is really critical. And actually our program, we also start working with indigenous communities. So we think that, you know, if we do a lot of work at scale, system shift type, you know, and one of the, I was just speaking at the Oceans panel on what Indonesia as a G20 host this year is preparing, for example, what is called the Blue Halo-S. It's a systems that support coastal communities and oceans, and there's a lot of SMEs involved in that whole process. So I think there are system shifts opportunities, and I think if we can do the capacity building, the finance as well as climate, I think making sure that, you know, we are doing it sustainably, I think we would be able to support this leapfrog. Thank you.
Great, Ria, sure, go ahead. You wanted to add a point, yeah.
Really like her comment, and it's very similar from what's happening in Brazil. And Brazil is going over a transition that we changed our, I would say, policy-making mindset. Until 2015, our subsidies and, I would say, public efforts were much more focused on large corporations, like spending public money there. The reality shows, and the pandemic was very important to that, the public policy money for SMEs is much, much more efficient. And as of today, our priority to support those businesses are digital, as you both mentioned, and the green economy. So everything related to energy efficiency, waste management, forest, oceans, everything related to this new climate economy that you need to be at the last mile and be efficient at dealing with resources. No one can do that better than SMEs, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting to note how we're seeing similarities and parallels being drawn across economies, you know, whether we're talking about Indonesia or we're talking about Brazil. You know, there are some common themes that seem to be emerging. But Ria, you know, to you, you know, when we talk digitization of SMEs, you know, it's all very well to say that we've probably moved forward from it being a nice to have to now a must have. And I think the pandemic was that wake up call that, you know, you've got to adopt technology. There is absolutely no going back on that. At the same time, you know, share with us where you think it's working and what are the challenges that are being faced in going down that path.
So I think, Shweta, challenges for me are three challenges. One is, like we've touched upon, is the lack of funding, right?
Yeah.
The second is awareness of what is actually available,
Correct.
Right.
right? And the third, I suppose, is sharing best practice within your peer network, right? So if I know another entrepreneur and something's worked well for them, I'm very likely to say, okay, you know what, let me try that.
Yeah.
Or let me learn, and you kind of, it just quickens the process, right? So I think those are three key challenges. And look, we're all aware that technology helps us work efficiently, and we see the benefit of it, but I come from a manufacturing space. So technology is not always just digital, right? For me,
Yes.
it means multiple things. And when you look at a digital perspective, yes, it is now, it's on tap, right? It's not an OPEX cost anymore. It's
Right.
a CAPEX cost. It's cloud enabled. And I think historically, when you've looked at digital technology, yes, we've thought about it as being very expensive. But now it's accessible to everybody, right? And it's leveled that playing field, whether you're a large-scale, industry or a small-scale industry. But personally, let me share an anecdote, right?
Yeah.
The last 2 years, navigating a business through COVID, we have a team of 120 people, 90 of which are blue-collared workers. You're aware of the migrant crisis that happened in India, right? Our number one priority was to protect our team.
Yeah.
Not to have pay cuts, not to let anyone go. So was it a priority to invest in technology for me?
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
If I had that access to capital, would I have done it? Sure, of course. But from the pool I had, my priority was my team and my people. So I think it's also the priority of the SME, at the time that you're talking about.
Right, and has that shifted now that we're moving
course.
towards recovery mode? Do you think there's
Yes.
more room to sort of accommodate some of those priorities now?
Absolutely. I mean, we are certainly in recovery mode, and it's great to be at the cross-section of climate change, sustainability in India, because as the world is looking to de-risk from China, we are at a great position. There's a lot that we're doing globally now. We're in 16 countries globally. Our export revenue has multiplied, quite a bit. We are seeing plastic bans come in, not just in India on the 1st of July, but across the world.
Yeah.
And like I said, products such as eco-wear are just becoming far more pertinent now. And it's no longer the future, it is the present and the need of the hour. So yes.
Let's take forward some of the challenges you mentioned, perhaps to you, Gustavo, in terms of access to capital. I think if that's highlighted as a key challenge, how do you solve for some of those challenges? And are there interesting models or examples or solutions that are emerging?
Yeah, the first bottleneck you see is capacity, skill, I would say. Technical knowledge about how to deal with credit, how to raise the money. A big change we did 2 or 3 years ago, we accepted training and digital incorporation, which sometimes is not, I would say, physical stuff, as an investment. So we're financing that through work capital lines, and then now we're financing through investment line, like 5 to 7 years. So reskilling or capacity, using the understanding that those investments, they should be treated as long-term one. And the third, as I mentioned, having the public policy supporting with credit enhancements for those investments in energy efficiency, waste management, and biomethane, all those climate-related assets that SMEs are much more efficient to do than the large companies. And another example that we had during the crisis as well, we had a lot of large companies stepping in and acting as an anchor for SMEs.
Right.
So they called us, the bank, and if you give me lines for us to lend to our suppliers and clients that are SME, could you benefit of some low rates and long tenors? And say yes. Just don't spread your supplier and vendor. You're working quite well. So this was an emergency line, and now it's becoming permanent, using as a large anchor, large companies as they want to capitalize the funds.
Anyone else would like to take forward the funding theme as well as, the access to capital?
So I think one of the main roles of government is to provide access to capital. SMEs, why we have cycles, we have to remember that maybe the average is sustainable, but maybe they will not be alive by the time the cycle is back to where it should be. So we have to take special care. And as Ray has mentioned, they were very busy about day to day. We have a saying in Arabic, المشغول لا يشغل. Don't make the busy person busier. So we took that as a guiding light when COVID hit. So within weeks, when COVID restrictions were implemented in Saudi, we reached out to all our SME clients. No payments are due this year. Automatically restructured. It was $1 billion initiative. Automatically restructured on the remainder of the tenor. Whether you need it, you don't. It's not worth the headache on you or on us to apply for this. We then noticed that some of the rising SMEs, because there's a lot of discussion to help people start, but not much to help people scale. So we focused on scaling startups. So we looked at the ones who were just beginning to scale pre-COVID. So we told them, for the first time we did it, you're pre-approved for a line of credit.
Right.
Just click, we send them the link, pre-filled, click, and we'll disperse the money.
But who is financing that?
Us, IDF,
Your
government.
bank.
Through the government,
The
yes.
government.
But is there
Through
also...
a bank?
No,
Directly
to our clients.
Wow.
We have programs through banks, but this one, because we had understanding for our clients, so why do we need to get them through that process? They are already busy. You are busy. No payments are due this year. There is a credit line available if you need it. Many didn't, and I talked to some. Said we just wanted to know it exists. Now I can focus on doing what I do. I never needed it, but I would have stopped because I didn't know I'd have money. We then included, as you mentioned, the supply chain financing. So we went to our larger clients and said, please don't make your SMEs wait for 90 days. Mm-hmm. We will finance it.
Right.
We will take this and just submit it to them directly. But I think the trick for all of this, again, if you think that don't make the busy person busier, she's worried about the 90 people, is using technology, honestly. So it's using technology. Having all of this readily available online, providing online services. Within 2 months, we issued fully digital contracts that are legally enforceable. So no one needs to come out of anything. They can get the loan, sign the contract, sign the mortgage of assignment, even the notes and mortgages, all digitally, legally enforceable digital contracts. Even the factory or the location visit, we did it through an update to the app. So making her life easy and doing her business while she's sitting at home or her office, I think is the most we can offer as government or as a financial institutions.
Right. Would you have ever done this had the pandemic not hit?
No, we're alhamdulillah, we're ready because we began doing this.
Right.
But the acceleration and the ability to bring other stakeholders, so to convince the Ministry of Justice to make this fully was very easy after COVID.
And as they say, there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen. So, exactly.
I can show you my picture before and after COVID. And you can see the decades.
Among other things that the pandemic has done to many of us. So. Yeah, but just highlighting the solution that you talked about. It's great to see the responsiveness, and that's what you expect governments to do. That's what you expect financial institutions to do. Be responsive to a crisis. Is there a downside in something like this? What would give you sleepless nights, or what would you be cautious about?
So the thing that we noticed after, as you mentioned, is the capacity. So while we are ready to avail, but if the counterpart is not ready to leverage that investment, they need to invest in technology or automation or digitalization, then all of that effort is to waste. So being a nerd at heart, we said people are staying at home, they cannot just do nothing. So we communicated with Stanford. Through this SIDF Academy, we launched evening programs, free, to all our clients. We trained 2,000 people during an average of 30 hours per person during only 2020. Now we have 5,000 people or so. And it's important to remember, it's not enough to train the workforce. You have to upskill the firm itself.
Right.
So upskilling the people without upskilling the firm, which means what systems do you need to do? How do you institutionalize this? How do you incorporate those changes?
Right.
Is not useful. So bringing all of that, we're still worried about making sure they have the capacity and mind share to be able to incorporate this, because they are under a lot of pressure already.
Yeah.
And that's what keeps us up at night.
And I think the next question I'd like any one of you to answer is that while these are fantastic ideas and solutions that we've seen come to the table and have got accelerated, as Ibrahim was saying, because of the pandemic, Is there a one-size-fits-all solution, and does that work? Or given that SME is such a large space, and we're talking about very different subsectors within the broader SME space, do you think there's a need to also understand the pain points of different segments and customize those solutions? Are we moving into that stage where that's needed, or do you think a one-size-fits-all approach works?
In our experience, we're sure that doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't. And that's exactly what we're trying to do at our bank. And in our perspective, in our country, never in the recent history was a best moment than this to be a SME in Brazil. Digital connection, as we spoke here, public policy wake up for this return for the society, credit, I won't say that's good, but it's more available than before. And let me count a personal anecdote that I lived myself. I was visiting the Amazon for a business trip, literally in the middle of the forest, 1 hour in boat. And I was paying my hostel with my phone, literally.
Right.
When I saw that happen in the middle of the Amazon, I said, that's transformational. And the message, the challenge is how the entrepreneur and the society rebuild the view of the SME, or the potential for that. I think it's much more a question of mindset that we have both at the bank and the banks and the entrepreneurs than anything else. And once one solution fits all, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's not efficient.
It's not efficient, but I think what the pandemic's clearly done, and Sherry, would love you to share your thoughts around this, is, it's accelerated the adoption of technology as well, right? I think the mindset shift that Gustavo's talking about, who would have thought, for instance, that all of our kids would be like studying online, that's such a great unifier across the world that we saw the pandemic do, right? And an overnight mindset shift to, understanding that, probably EdTech is a reality, online education is a reality. Similarly, for SMEs, an overnight shift into you've got to offer it this way or it doesn't exist. But do you think that we haven't focused enough on resolving the challenges that remain? And she talked about access to capital as one of them. But what about the fact that we haven't done enough to make our economies, as they say, future ready, or skill and train the people to be digital ready? Do you think that is something that needs a greater focus?
Absolutely. I think you mentioned about the education. Our Minister of Education in Indonesia, Nadiem Makarim, he was actually created a decathlon, Gojek, and he is now Minister of Education. So,
right.
He's thinking quite far ahead in terms of how to support digitization and in the system. But he also struggled because I think Indonesia is a 17,000 islands, the world's largest archipelagic nation. So, there are many places that the kids couldn't get access to the digital communication, and some of them had to, I think you see stories all over, right? So how they had to go up to the trees or go, it's really difficult. Right. And it's actually, the inequality has been more stark because of the pandemic. And those with the digital divide has really been, I think, much, has caused a lot of pain for these types of these communities who don't have access. And I think China, one example, they have gotten out of poverty, the target 10 years ahead of target because of access to digital access in the most remote parts of the country.
Right.
So I think that's a lesson that we can learn from on the physical infrastructure.
Because unless we solve for that, we cannot achieve. Yeah, Ria, you have a point to make.
Sorry, Shweta, I was just going to go back to your question of whether one size fits all.
Yeah.
And I'm always screaming from the mountaintop to say that if you are, if you are a purpose-driven business that is, aligned with ESG and shows true impact, then I think your financial incentives should be different to everybody else. So from that aspect, I don't think one size fits all. I think if you're doing something that is better, and your revenues derive from a circular economy model, et cetera, then
So you're championing the cause of
Yes.
having better incentives and
Correct.
better and more customized models for certain kind of businesses that are actually perhaps doing things that are more relevant to today's state of play.
Absolutely,
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I want to take forward what Sherry was saying, especially around the digital divide, because I think that's interesting. On one hand, we do argue, and Ria, you made that point about how technology has actually been a leveler for SMEs, right? And how some of the solutions that are being offered, thanks to technology, have helped SMEs actually bridge that gap with large corporations, because you know what, now technology is available. The same technology is available to an SME as it was, say, to a large corporation earlier. And earlier, you needed those deep pockets to be able to invest in technology. Now you're seeing that. But on the other hand, you've got Sherry talking about how the digital divide has actually deepened and the pandemic has worsened it. So would any of you like to say that, are these two separate trends we're talking about, or is it a bit of both?
So when you ask, is one size fits all, and I'll use it to answer this.
Yeah.
I agree we should curate solutions and funding depending on the incentives and direction of the government. But I also think if you take a step back and think macro, there are things that you have to do regardless.
Right.
Digital infrastructure is essential, regardless, if you want to be future ready. Upskilling people and firms, regardless. You need to invest in upskilling of people and firms. Reducing regulatory burden and increasing transparency of government services or bureaucracy or requirement is great regardless. So when you take a step back, there are things that we have to do that one size fits all that we need to do to
Across
ensure
the board,
that
you're
across the
saying.
board.
Yeah.
And then you should curate financial incentives depending, and we offer additional incentives, as you mentioned, on energy efficiency, automation, digitization, things that increase competitiveness, aligned with ESG and what have you. But that shouldn't limit our view to the basic needs
Right.
for any entity to operate.
Right. And
I will add to this point that I'm speaking that here in Davos and to my global partners as well. If you are investing in an emerging country
Yeah.
and you're investing in SME, it's full ESG.
Yeah.
You cannot separate, because if you are turning an SME company more innovative, more climate-oriented, more skilled, it has a social impact at the last mile that's not measurable. So anyone investing in emerging economy with SME, equity, credit, guarantee, whatever, it's a full ESG, and there's no question about your just raising
Go ahead,
your
Ria.
comment.
No, Shweta, I was going to say, I mean, when we look at India, it's not just about urban entrepreneurs, right? It's about rural entrepreneurs
yeah,
as
of
well.
course. Yeah.
In Brazil, the same.
Same perhaps for Brazil or Saudi or for Indonesia. I think it's the same story across.
In
Yeah.
Brazil, you have the urban,
Yeah.
the rural, and the forest entrepreneurs.
Right. Right.
So I think that, yes, the digital divide is there. It's a bit of both. And in the last 2 years, we have been very cognizant of it. Right, so I think that we're trying to actively maybe bridge, but it exists.
No, but the question, and a very pointed one to each one of you, is: has it worsened? I mean, the digital divide during the pandemic, or has tech emerged as an enabler?
I think it's emerged as an enabler, and we're seeing it emerge as an enabler.
In Saudi, it's emerged as an enabler, and it was reduced even in rural areas. The investment by the government, by the private sector, by the public themselves has been significant.
And especially enabler also for SMEs.
Yeah, especially for SMEs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The more drive is SMEs and rural areas.
So that's a way more significant trend than the divide. And the divide, as you said, can be solved for if we do the three things that you mentioned, for instance, upskilling, as well as reducing the regulatory burden and investing in infrastructure that will solve for people, children not climbing trees to access the internet. I think that's a given in terms of what governments and the private sector need to focus on. And that'll bring me to what I'd love as closing comments from all of you on the partnership, the public-private partnership. And I think that's what forums like these, the World Economic Forum, that brings together governments, semi-government institutions, business leaders, allows us to do. Think of solutions where everyone is an important stakeholder. And I'd love to come to that as perhaps the closing comments and solutions, but I want to open it up to any questions that anyone in the audience would have to any of the panelists. Anybody, any questions? Mr. Birla, your thoughts?
over here.
Well, I was just wondering about SMEs and their ability to attract digitally native talent that can actually put through and implement the digitization that is so required. Can they actually attract the kind of talent that they need to, who are digitally native, and can they retain that talent after that?
Good question.
I think so.
Yeah.
And when you speak about SME, I would say digital interaction, usually is not something very sophisticated. Usually you take a younger person of your family or your relatives, and at 20 plus years, they can manage that if they're, I would say, barely trained, in our view, overall speaking.
I think we have one more question, but would anyone else like to add to
I mean, my thought is, Ms. Birla, is that now with this, the future of work that we talk about and remote working, right? I think that, you know, initially there was a little bit of restriction because you would think, oh, I need to go to a tier 1 city, the cost of living, et cetera, et cetera. But now you've actually, your access to human capital is far more because you could be sitting in a tier 2 town and still working for, you know, a company remotely in tier 1, et cetera, and you've got a larger access to human capital and talent.
But I'd like you to focus a little more, and maybe someone else, and even someone like Mr. Birla, if you could answer that. Do you think we've accepted hybrid as a post-pandemic normal, as they say, the new normal? Or do you think there is a bit of, we're in recovery mode, it's a bit of going back to, you know, let's go back to our pre-pandemic life of, you know, hybrid, what's that?
We actually updated our work manuals. We accepted hybrid.
Yeah.
Every meeting has a link. There is a day a week where you can work from home. As part of your package, we updated the tools we give our employees, and it's part of life.
Nice.
Even for mothers and what have you, even the maternity leave was extended to include hybrid. So we don't have any meetings. You know, in Saudi today, there is no such thing as working hours in the government. It's 24 hours, but we accepted that post 5 p.m., the basic is online, not in person.
Right. Interesting. And I love the point about there being no working hours. Right. I think we have another question there. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Lamia Al-Haj from Oman. Thanks to all the esteemed panelists. My question is to Dr. Ibrahim. You shared with us an impressive model of how the Saudi government empowered the SMEs. My question is, do you think that goes back to having a big budget? Is it the government will? Is it a bit of both? I mean, it's an inspiring model, and we'd love to see that in other countries. So what's the secret to that empowerment?
So I think it's, let's remember that this was mid-2020, no big budget then. Oil was, for the first time ever in the US, traded at negative rates. So the Saudi had multiple shocks. There is the health shock we all went to with an economic aspect that came with it, but also the government revenue shock because oil collapsed. So it wasn't because of that. It was because, in my mind, two things. We had the clear objective. We set a vision, and we're all measured on KPIs on achieving that. So we know that this is the target, and we have to go through the target. Second, there is a will to act. And despite revenue crashing, SIDF approved we approved loans 40% higher than the year before, and the year before was the highest on record. So it's just to signal that because we have the commitment on industrialization and SME support, we need to move through it. And if we are not committed to it during the downtime, then we are not really committed to it.
And I guess the leaders saw the long-term revenues. It's like an investment, basically.
Yeah, I don't think we expected long-term revenue, honestly. We took a hit. We had to adjust our long-term plans. We took it as part of the objective. This is the time to be committed. We will figure out the financing over the next 3-4 years. No one expected a recovery of oil, but we took it through our adjusted plans.
Thank you.
Right. I think we're going to... are there any more? No, please, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just curious when people were saying that technology has been an enabler. Since you were talking about the tree, that's about internet. But, we actually run a social networking platform for persons with disability, and it's an IVR platform. So I just was curious about when technology being an enabler, do you also just look at the simple phone? Is that a problem in the Amazon where reaching the unreached, smartphone penetration is not there? Do you all have that? I was just curious. I mean, it's not,
Can you repeat
maybe
the
I can
question?
take, do you look at technology being an enabler only with a smartphone, or do you also look at it with a simple phone? I was just interested in knowing the mobile penetration. I can take it offline with you all because we may have lost time.
No, but I think someone could quickly answer. I think your pointed question, if I get it right, is it smartphone-led penetration, or is
because
it
when we say
just
technology is an enabler, is it only smartphone, which will take some time in some countries? That's the reason. And are we looking at non-smartphone?
Yeah, on the first side, I see two important evolutions. One is the digital one, and it's a smartphone. And believe me, you still have a lot of Indians and communities that they have access to that. And that's recent. I'm speaking 1-2 years ago, so they are still learning how to do that. And the second is solar energy. Those solar, alongside with digital and a little bit of sanitation, they're completely free to do whatever they want.
Thank you. Because I just think the non-smartphone also is a solution in terms of tech, till you get smartphone.
Sure. I think in some economies it's going to be, a more phased approach as opposed to, and I think for instance, what's interesting in an economy like India is that we're actually seeing a lot of, entrepreneurs go for mobile first solutions. So we've actually played catch up to the developed world in a very big way, because we're seeing, mobile first, interesting solutions that are coming up. So I think we're running out of time, and I do want to make sure that everyone gets in closing comments. 60 seconds on the prescriptive solutions of the public-private partnership that can help rebuild the SME sector. Terry, let's start with you.
I would like to propose, because this year G20 is in Indonesia, next year it will be in India. It was
India,
in Saudi right before. But this year the Indonesian government has put 3 priorities. I think health, climate, and the third one actually is for digital inclusion, prioritizing on the SMEs. So, and I'm actually the advisor to the government of Indonesia on the climate aspects, and also I have a very deep passion, as you know, on the SME side. So is there a chance, maybe, we are all from the emerging developing countries, there's a proposition of a blended finance alliance. In fact, it just passed yesterday through the G20 Sherpa group.
Right.
So Indonesia is calling for this alliance, and there are actually opportunities of policies, philanthropy. There's a blended format. Let's scale up support for SMEs together, and maybe we could bring this panel forward to do something beyond just a talk, to actually concretely have some outcome. And actually, WEF reached out to me to work on impact and funding and SME. So maybe we can do that together.
Yeah, and I can see some, WEF officials here. I think everyone's clapping, and there's a big thumbs up coming to your solution. And WEF officials here, and now I think it's over to WEF to take forward your brilliant idea. But quick closing comments again from both of you.
At Saudi right now, we are redesigning policies and incentives, and we see ourselves, for example, the development funds, as an enabler for the private sector. So all innovative SMEs, you're welcome to come. We're happy to support. Come invest in Saudi.
Wow, that was a perfect closing comment. Ria.
Shweta, I would love to see the scaling of SMEs, right? We know the positive impact it has, the job creation, it needs to happen and be an ongoing priority. So like I said previously, financial incentives, can we reduce the GST and the taxation on products like EcoWare? Can we have large multinationals incorporate SMEs into their supply chain, right? It innovates, it helps them innovate, it helps SMEs scale. And I think, like what Ibrahim touched on, can we reduce the hassle cost for SMEs, like whatever that means when you are thinking of developing technology?
Right, perfect. Gustavo.
In our perspective, the summers that in Brazil was never a better moment to be an entrepreneur in SME as we are today, based on digital, based on sustainability, and everything that you are investing on SME in emerging markets is fully ESG. Nothing is better to allocate resource and capital that leaves impact on the last mile than an SME, and that's why I clap hands for her proposal.
Right. Yes, and I think, in the interest of just wrapping up this conversation, we started on a not-so-happy note saying, just look at the impact that the pandemic has had on SMEs. And we're ending on a hugely positive and optimistic note of, talking about various solutions that have emerged and how the crisis has actually become an opportunity, how technology has actually become an enabler. And now we're already talking about global solutions to a very local problem. And, I think taking forward what you've said, that if economies could come together, we could see the G20 IT leadership come together, we could see ideas that would work across economies, and yet we could be more prescriptive in making it customized to offer solutions that would work for certain segments. I think that's the answer to rebuilding SMEs and making them more future-proof. So thank you all for being part of this panel and for sharing your insights.